So, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 329 has officially released, and there's a few things that I want to talk about in this chapter, but the main thing that I really want to talk about involves Star and Stripe, and potentially what her quirk could be, and why All For One wants it, and we'll talk about that right after this intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion of My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 329, and boy oh boy, was this a real doozy. The translations are finally out, and when it comes to the translations between the official and the unofficial, there wasn't that much of a difference. There are 2 or 3 differences that I'm going to go into, but primarily what this video is going to be going over is the importance that Star and Stripe and what her quirk could potentially be, and why All For One may want that quirk, and maybe understanding what All For One's master plan is, as well as potentially going over Spinner's role and the role that he's going to be playing in the future as well. Yeah, before we jump right into the actual discussion, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I talk about My Hero Academia. I do reviews, discussions, and do cover the spoilers when they come out. So if that's something that you're interested in, and if you're interested in My Hero Academia, why don't you subscribe to my YouTube channel? And with that out the way, let's first start off with the differences between the official and unofficial translations. To start off, the main 2 differences that I want to talk about, and they're very minor, involves All For One speech, because pretty much everything is the same between the official and unofficial translations when it comes to how they are translated and how the story is conveyed. So, the first difference I want to get into involves All For One's speech and how he's speaking to Spinner, and in the unofficial translation, he brings up how he has connections all over the world, over the seas, and how if he were to not keep those evil organizations in check, then the countries would turn on each other. That is what is stated in the unofficial translation. But in the official translations, All For One still brings up that he has connections overseas in other countries, but he says that if his friends overseas were to cause trouble, then it would cause the other countries to change their priorities from helping Japan to just helping quail the crimes that are in those countries. So anything, it just makes more sense for All For One to have full control over the world, instead of saying that the people outside of the world will just turn on each other if he's left unchecked. So it just makes a better understanding for what All For One is saying in the official translations in comparison to the unofficial. And then the next difference comes from All For One's speech and how he's talking about Star and Stripe, and when he's saying her importance in America, and how in the unofficial translation he brings up how she is the strongest woman and how she hails from the home of the heroes, the land of the free, and sits at the zenith of heroes all around the world. But in the official translation, he doesn't bring up the idea of her being the zenith of all hero societies, but that she is supreme in the land of the free, the home of the heroes, which is very different, because even though, yes, America is the home of the heroes, Japan is more the core of heroes in this world, where some of the strongest and best heroes reside, specifically All Might, who would have been and probably still is the zenith of heroes, even though he has retired. So I think that it's just more clarity in the official translation than in the unofficial translation, so there's that. And yeah, that's pretty much all of the differences between the official and unofficial translation. The only last difference I see comes at the end of the chapter, where you have Shigaraki, who's questioning who he is. He says, "Who am I?" indeed in the unofficial translations, but in the official translation, he brings up the idea of what exactly he is. So it's very different. Who implies that he believes that he is a person, but he doesn't know what person he is, while in the official translation, him saying what he is implies more that he could be a person, he could be a human, or he could just be an object. So it gives like a better spectrum of how Shigaraki is viewing himself, and that he may not view himself as necessarily being human. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about with the differences. And before we get into the meat of this entire discussion, I want to bring up like another point that I brought up in the review involving Spinner, and something that I didn't notice until I reread the official chapter. And it mainly comes from just a little transition thing about how All For One is talking to Spinner, and how he's praising Spinner for being the only one that is guarding him the entire time, while everyone else literally went and did their own thing, and how he's going to finally support Tomoshigura in actually fighting, and how he's going to as I quote, spin the tail. And it's funny because his name is Spinner, someone who spins the tail. Oh, all for one, you cheeky little... he's being pretentious in this moment. And the point that I want to bring up is the expression on Spinner's face. And you have All For One saying how Spinner was a nobody and that even though he's a heteromorphic, he lived a difficult life. And the reason why I bring this up is because I do think that Spinner is going to betray All For One and be siding with Shigaraki, because among everyone in the League of Villains, he's the one who is most dedicated and most loyal to Shigaraki. So it is kind of weird to see that he's being the bodyguard of All For One, but just that slight expression on his face may indicate like a little bit of disgust for All For One, and how maybe he's doing this only to portray All For One and to give Shigaraki an edge to finally take him out, because Spinner doesn't like to be called a heteromorph. We learned that in the My Hero Academia when they were fighting off those cult members. He brings up this idea that he doesn't like that term and he thinks that people are just doing it to be politically correct. Or not to be politically correct. He just hates being called that. And the fact that All For One is telling him this and he has that expression may show that he doesn't truly trust or believe in All For One, which could imply that he wants to be a double agent, or he is a double agent, which leads to him betraying All For One and having Shigaraki eventually taking out All For One with the help of Spinner. Because All For One did say that Spinner is going to support Shigaraki, and I think that he's going to literally do that by taking out All For One alongside Shigaraki. So that's just kind of something that I thought of. So yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see where Spinner is going from here and if he's actually going to be a traitor or not. So yeah, talking a little bit about Spinner, let's get into the big meat of this discussion I want to talk about, and it's going to be Star and Stripes Quirk. Because in this chapter, we pretty much had All For One come out to Spinner and tell him that, yeah, if we get our hands on Star and Stripes Quirk, yeah, we're gonna be at a big advantage against the people in this war, and that it's just going to be a formality. Like, we're gonna basically win this war if we have her Quirk. It's just that we still have to go to work because it cannot be avoided. But yeah, if we have her Quirk, it's gonna be great. And I think there's a misconception about this idea, and the misconception is that All For One needs Star and Stripes Quirk. That is actually not the case, because in the chapter, he doesn't say that he needs her Quirk, but he says that if they have to go up against her, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but if they gain her Quirk, then it's going to be a lot easier. He doesn't say that he needs her Quirk because she would definitively be the one to like make sure that his plans don't go awry, but that she is going to be like a big road bump in his plans. So we don't know what her Quirk is, but we know it's going to be very impactful in shifting the tides of the war against All For One, which is why All For One wants it. So this leads me to have like 3 different ideas about how eventually the fight between her and Shigaraki is going to go. And we're going to get into predictions of what I think her Quirk is, because I think it may be tied to All For One and One For All and their abilities, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So for starters, the 3 paths that I think that she's most likely going to take is that she's going to die, and even through that death, there are 2 ways to view it. She's going to die, but her entire body is going to be decayed, so no one gets her Quirk, meaning that at the very least, All For One wins, because it means that he doesn't have to deal with her and her power. He may not have the power, but the heroes won't have it, so it means that he still will have a easier time taking out the heroes. Or the second part of that is that Shigaraki kills her, but they still have her corpse, so that All For One can still have or find a way to take the Quirk from the corpse, because we know that they are capable of doing that. Now, he may need Dr. Rocky's help to do that, or he may be able to do it on his own, or heck, he may be able to take away Quirks from corpses. We just don't know, but that is a possibility. And then the second thing that could happen is that you have Shigaraki actually take her Quirk with All For One, since he has All For One, which would mean it will be very detrimental to the heroes, but very beneficial to All For One, because then he would have access to it. And there's this idea that it doesn't make sense for Shigaraki to get it, because Shigaraki wouldn't willingly give over the power to All For One, his master, because he pretty much hates him. But the idea is that All For One will eventually take over him and be able to pass her Quirk over to him. while Shigaraki won't be able to decay him at the same time, so that's a possibility. And through this second option, this puts the villains at a major advantage and gets the heroes to be at a very disadvantage, especially if we learn that Star and Stripes' quirk is OP as heck. I don't think that it is, but it could be. But the third option that I think of, and it's the one that I think I like the most, is that she gets in a fight with Shigaraki. Shigaraki fails to steal her quirk. She's able to escape, but she's heavily injured and basically is comatose for the rest of the series, which is very good because it keeps her like character to potentially come back in later arcs or later on in the series, if not all the way to the end, right before it ends. And it also doesn't really mess up the balance that the heroes and the villains have, because here's the thing: if she still has a quirk, but she's incapacitated for 2 or 3 days, which is around the same time that Shigaraki is going to be completed, and most likely around the same time that Shigaraki and All For One will try to capture One For All, it doesn't really change the story a lot, except for the fact that it puts the heroes at a disadvantage because they have one less hero to fight on their side, and it keeps All For One and the villains on same plane because nothing really changes for them because they already had the advantage from the war and the damage that they caused. So yeah, also there's the fourth thing, that nothing really comes of this, and that she just goes to the heroes, she defeats Shigaraki, and then they eventually defeat the villains. I think that's probably the least likely of the 4 options, but I'm very partial to number 3, that she could leave, flee away from Shigaraki, but is heavily injured and is unable to fight, and it kind of keeps like the balance between the heroes and the villains not be weighed heavy on one side or heavy on the other. So that's just my thoughts. And then with that, I want to go into probably the last part of this entire video, is going in and making a prediction on what Star and Stripes' quirk is. And I'm gonna go over what I don't think her quirk is. I do have a list of like superpowers that I got from this one website. I may list it in the description down below, but yeah, it's a pretty much like a very comprehensive list of different hero abilities, not necessarily quirks, but potential superpower abilities that could be translated over to quirks. And I have kind of 2 categories to look at what Star and Stripes' quirk can and can't really be. And the first category involves quirks or powers that All For One has, or has access to, or had access to, because he wants her quirk, which means that her quirk has to be different from other quirks that he's had, or he wouldn't necessarily need her quirk if he's already had it. So that means that her quirk can't be really involved with enhanced or supernatural physical skills. It cannot be a fission-based thing. It cannot involve ESP. It can't be a transport or travel type of quirk. And it can't be a flight type quirk, because we've seen all those type of superpowers in quirk form that are either held by All For One, held by someone that worked for All For One, or was in close proximity to All For One or Dr. Garaki for them to use. And then the second category that I want to go to is a category of quirks that we've already seen in the series, because I do believe that Star and Stripe has a very unique quirk that we haven't seen in the series, which is why All For One wants it, because it's going to benefit his plan because of how unique it is. So I think that it cannot be a quirk that we've already seen, or in a certain category that we've seen a lot of. So this would include emission quirks, and this is different from emitter type quirks. It means specifically the emission of a certain product or a specific substance. So like similar to Ashido's acid, I don't think it's going to be something like that. It can't be something that is like mentality based, because we've seen a character, specifically Nezu with his high specs, that has high intelligence, as well as the fact that All For One himself is very intelligent. So having a mentality based quirk would just be redundant. Something that has to deal with physical or mental domination, very similar to brainwashing or despot, because we've seen those powers before, as well as All For One kind of has that ability just with his sheer charisma to a sense. And it also can't be something that manipulates physics or reality in the essence of like healing, which is a quirk held by the nurse at UA, as well as a double summit quirk that was held by Twice, as well as like some type of gravity type quirk as we've seen through Uraraka. And it can't be any type of elemental quirk either, because we've just seen a whole bunch of characters that have like element based quirks, specifically Shoto and Endeavor. Nor can it be an illusion type quirk, which we've seen through the quirk of Glamour. Nor can it be really a mimicry type quirk, similar to quirks like Monoma. It can't be really shape-shifting like Toga. It can't even be like elemental mimicry like Tetsu Tetsu, nor can it be like an organic mimicry such as like the mutant quirks. And getting to the last category that I think applies when it comes to like powers that we've seen are just divine and OP powers. I don't think that we've seen like definitively divine or OP powers unless we consider Shigaraki's decay, but I think that the reasoning why I don't think that her quirk is extremely divine or extremely OP, but has to be very specific to All For One's plan is because if her power is OP and is divine, then she would have been the #1 hero and not All Might. She would have been the one that everyone would have looked up to and not All Might. And for the most part, all people knew about All Might is that he was just super strong. So yeah, the quirks that I just listed are powers that I do not think that All For One is looking for, because if he was looking for them, there's a whole bunch of people that he could have stolen it from, but the quirk that he's looking for is specifically coming from Star and Stripe. And now, going into my predictions for what I think Star and Stripe quirk is, I do have 3 different ones, and they're going to be going order from least likely to most likely. And these are kind of like inspired by other heroes. You'll probably know what hero I'm thinking of from the first and second ones. But the first one that I want to bring up is the idea of energy conversion, which basically means that she has the ability to absorb energy and convert it into another form of energy. And to put up an example, let's just say a character shoots fire at her. She's able to like absorb that fire and either redirect that fire to be even stronger or convert it into some type of energy and use it as a projectile. We haven't really seen a quirk like that in My Hero Academia as far as I know, so it would fall into that unique category. But then we've also seen sort of similar quirks before, primarily just taking on energy or in some cases power and transforming it into something else is something that we've seen in One For All. But we see that All For One is going after One For All, so having a quirk very similar to it would make sense for All For One to want, because he could use it, which could make him even more invincible, because it means that attacks that are thrown at him that are like elemental based or has some type of like energy property to him will just not affect him at all, which would probably make it a lot harder for other characters to fight him. For instance, if Deku were to use Black Whip on someone who has energy conversion, they could just absorb the energy of Black Whip, which means that a way that Deku can restrain someone will pretty much be useless. Or even if it's like energy conversion, as in converting kinetic energy into potential energy, someone like coming in for a punch and they absorbing it and then being able to direct it back at them. We've seen that in a Nomu, so that's why I think that this may be the least likely, but I still think that it's a possibility. The second quirk that I think that she could have that is more likely is a life force absorption quirk. The ability to absorb life force / energy and utilize it in a different way. And the reason why I bring this up is because she could be inspired, obviously by Superman and most likely All Might, who was inspired by Superman. But the reason why I think of this one is because of the superhero Rogue. And she is probably one of the more powerful, like strength-based superheroes that are female besides Wonder Woman that I can think of. And she has pretty much the ability to absorb life force, but along with life force, she's able to also absorb powers. And that would be very interesting for All For One to have, because it would tie into like that idea of him being able to not only absorb quirks, but also absorb people's life force. And I know we already have a quirk that is based off life force, but it's only meant to extend a person's life, as seen through Dr. Garaki. But if All For One wants to live on indefinitely and not necessarily through Shigaraki, then having a quirk that converts life force into his own life force to prolong his own life, that would be pretty cool. And since we know the more quirks you have, the more life force it consumes, maybe his bigger goal is to absorb the life force of everyone on Earth, or of like particular people, to sustain his life indefinitely, so that he can be the Demon King for all time and forever. So yeah, that's kind of why I think that that's a possibility for a quirk, because that could be his plan, to just extend his life even more, pretty much become immortal in a sense. But then we get to the final one, and I think I like this one the most, and basically it could be that she's just adaptation. And you may be thinking, well, what does that mean? Well, it means, from what I've seen, the idea of a quirk that is adaptation means that she can pretty much survive and do anything. to the point where it's not completely broken, but that she doesn't need to breathe anywhere. She'll be immune to poisons. And a subcategory of this would be self-sustaining, which means that she's able to go without eating, going without sleeping. She can breathe wherever she wants. She doesn't need to drink. She doesn't need protection from the environment. She doesn't need to poop. Come on. All For One obviously looks like the type of person who hates pooping, and having a quirk that prevents him from pooping would be great for him. But with that aside, I think that that would be a cool ability for her, because we see that she's just standing on top of a plane, which frankly is pretty much impossible. And this could also like show that with her adaptations that it just gives her like bigger body mass, speed, and all of that could be incorporated into it, which would explain why she's muscular. But also it could explain why All For One wants it, because it will basically make him like not necessarily invincible, but it will make it so that it's going to be very difficult to kill him. If he doesn't need to breathe, sleep, eat, he can go on fighting for multiple days, if not indefinitely, which means that any fight he is in, he will win it just by pure attrition. He will just outlast his opponent until his opponent cannot go any further and just defeat them then. That seems like something that All For One would love, and it also ties into what I said in the previous like idea of her quirk, is that it will also mean that he could possibly live indefinitely, because if you don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, and you don't need to worry about the environment, then really there's nothing in this world that can really hurt you like to a grave extent. Can't be poisoned. So in that instance, you're pretty much immortal, which would mean that he could carry on his evil deeds indefinitely without having to worry about anything potentially killing him. At least nothing can kill him through natural disasters, through the natural means. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on what I think her quirks could be. But hey, I could be wrong. She could just have a very strong strength quirk that is based off something that All For One wants. Like, oh, her strength is based off stockpiling and she can't take powers, but it's similar to All For One and she's very strong. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. These are just my thoughts on the matter. But hey, let me ask you this. What do you think Star and Stripe's quirk is? Do you think that is super strength? Do you think that it's the life force absorption? Or do you think that it's something else entirely that has never been thought of and is just only known by Hirokoshi? Just leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. If you like this video, leave a like on it. If you like my type of content, why not subscribe and hit that red subscription button so that you can get more videos like this, as well as hitting the notification button to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!